Raised in Wisconsin during the Great Depression, Marv Harshman would carry the lessons he learned with him throughout his life and would prove pivotal to Marv's later success. After moving to the Pacific Northwest and graduating from Lake Stevens High School, Marv attended Pacific Lutheran University, where he lettered in 4 sports, before graduating in 1942. That same year, he was drafted to the Chicago Cardinals but served 3 years in the Navy until 1945, when he would return to his alma mater, taking the position of head basketball coach. From 1954 to 1958, his Lutz basketball team won or shared the Evergreen Intercollegiate Conference regular season championship 4 straight years. During his tenure at POU, he also served as head coach for the football, baseball, and track teams. When the legendary Jack Frill retired from coaching in 1958, Harshman moved to the East Side to serve as his replacement as head basketball coach for Washington State University, compiling a record of 155 wins and 181 losses over 13 years. In 1971, Marv moved across state again to take over for basketball coach Tex Winters at the University of Washington. He found much greater success coaching the Huskies, compiling a record of 246 wins, 146 losses, including 3 NCAA tournament runs, 2 NIT appearances over 14 years. In 1974, the Huskies would give longtime friend and nemesis John Wooden his last career loss, beating the team by over 20 points. John Wooden and the Bruins would later go on to win the national championship. Harshman's teams were famously known for both their competitiveness and class. He was a true man of integrity and humility. He instilled the importance of both to his players. He took a role of teacher to heart and took pride in being an example to his teams. During his storied career, Harshman won over 600 games, multiple division championships, as well as coaching the United States in the 1975 Pan American Games. Marv was inducted to the Naismith Memorial Hall of Fame in 1985, as well as a founding member of the National Collegiate Basketball Hall of Fame in 2006. Off the court, Marv is remembered for his love of writing, conversation, and his wife Dorothy. On the court, he will be remembered as a master strategist and teacher. Marv passed away in 2013 at the age of 95. Jose Calugas is the first Filipino recipient of the U.S. Medal of Honor during World War II. He joined the Philippine Scouts, a subset of the U.S. Army stationed in the then colonized Philippines. In 1930, he rose to the rank of sergeant, got married, and started a family. Just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese began to bomb the Philippines in an attempt to gain a better foothold in the Pacific and destroy American bases located there. The entire army retreated to the Bataan Peninsula on the largest island, Luzon, and fought to defend it against the Japanese invaders. Calugas was working a kitchen duty 100 yards from the U.S. defensive line when a nearby artillery battery was hit directly, killing almost all of its members. Without orders, Calugas charged 1,000 yards through enemy fire to the gun, retrieved the wounded survivors, and persuaded other volunteers to help him repair the gun. He fired for several hours, giving the U.S. troops a chance to regroup in the area, saving several lives. Calugas was arranged to get his Medal of Honor on February 24, 1942, but the Battle of Bataan was still raging. Getting worse by the day, on April 9th, Major General Edward King Jr. surrendered, and Calugas, along with 76,000 Americans and Filipinos, embarked on a 65-mile forced march to the Japanese-occupied Camp O'Donnell, known by its occupants as Camp O'Death. 5,000 to 18,000 Filipino and 500 to 650 Americans died during the march. Calugas survived the march, only to be beaten and worked for 8 months at the camp. Yet his spirits remained unbroken. When he sent to work at the Japanese rice mill, he secretly began sending information to a nearby guerrilla unit as a spy. In 1945, the U.S. troops returned to the Philippines. Calugas joined the unit, helping the Americans take back his country. Calugas was finally given his Medal of Honor on April 30th, 1945. He continued to work in the military for another 12 years, retiring with the rank of captain, moved to Tacoma with his family, and he passed away on January 18th, 1998. Glenn Oliver is another World War II veteran. Glenn survived several Japanese prison camps and a death ship during World War II. A member of the Minnesota National Guard, Glenn, with the rest of his unit, were mobilized into full U.S. Army service 3 days after marrying his sweetheart Esther in February of 1941. He trained at Fort Lewis under the 194th Tank Battalion, which moved to defend the Philippines in 1941. 9 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Clark Air Base was bombed by the Japanese Air Force. All American forces in the Philippines retreated to Bataan as a last resort. Between January 7th and April 9th, Glenn and the 194th Tank Battalion fought hard, holding back the Japanese Air Force from the beaches and protecting American territory. Unfortunately, due to limited rations, illness, and the delayed arrival of air reinforcements, they were forced to surrender. This began the infamous Bataan Death March. Glenn, along with 60,000 to 80,000 American and Filipino soldiers, were forcibly marched for 65 miles to the Japanese-occupied Camp O'Donnell. If the ill soldiers couldn't keep up, they were bayoneted, shot, or even buried alive. 3,000 of Oliver's American and Filipino allies died. Upon arrival, Oliver was passed from camp to camp, forced to repair bridges, work farms, and run a burial detail for the Japanese army, all while suffering from illness himself. In 1944, Glenn was sent to Japan on the Arizen Maru, a Japanese hell ship, packed so tightly to the hold with POWs they couldn't sit down. On October 24th, because Japan refused to mark their ships, American planes mistaken the freighter for cargo ships bombed the ship. Escaping on a makeshift raft, Oliver and a fellow soldier huddled together for 4 days until their rescue. There were only 9 survivors from the roughly 1,800 POWs. No one was killed during the bombing of the ship or the subsequent sinking. The Japanese sent rescue ships, rescuing only the Japanese personnel and leaving prisoners of war to die in the water. Glenn was lost at sea for 4 days before he was recaptured by Japanese forces and sent to Osaka. Glenn was liberated in September of 1945. He weighed only 85 pounds and needed to stay in hospitals for 9 months. Throughout the ordeal, he'd kept a class ring Esther had given him. While it was stolen before he could return to her, he would stay with her for the rest of his life. Glenn and his wife moved to Tacoma and worked at the Asarco plant and started a family. In 1950, he enlisted in the inactive enlisted reserve and was called to active duty at Fort Lewis, training recruits for the Korean conflict. He was honorably discharged as a sergeant first class in 1951. He returned to work at Asarco as a chief engineer until his retirement.